Yo, what's going on, you guys? Your boy B Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. You understand what I'm saying? Don't miss basketball conversations every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time, is where we discuss basketball-related topics, news, debate discussions, and everything else in between around the world of basketball. You understand what I'm saying? So for all the news people who are just coming in, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to get all the latest notifications when I drop some videos or do some live streams. You know what I mean? To keep up with the fun. All right. So, with that out the way, let's get down to the business at hand here. Okay. I was actually scoping around, the computer, just, minding my business, dueling around, when I ran into an article written by the Boston Herald, and Kevin McHale had his 2 cents about, the Jordan documentary and when his Celtics walked off the court in 1988 against the Detroit Pistons. All right. Now, this was necessarily dragged into it because Isaiah Thomas talked about it in the documentary how his team got trashed on when they basically refused to shake hands with the Chicago Bulls in 1991, and he talked about how the Celtics didn't shake hands with the Pistons after they beat them in 1988, and Isaiah Thomas said that was okay as long as we beat them. All right, so Kevin McHale had a chance to talk about it, and this was an article that was made May 10th, so it's actually I think it was May 10th was last Sunday. Okay, so here's what McHale had to say. He said, on and quote, first of all, you can see why the Pistons didn't like the Bulls. The Bulls complain all the time. That's one thing that came across. All right, in the documentary, like this is not basketball. This is thuggery. All that stuff. And I thought the Bulls really disrespected what the Pistons were able to do. But hey, when you kill the king, you can talk shit. All right. And then basically he talked about how the Pistons and their Celtics rivalry that was going on in the mid '80s. And here's what Ken McHale said about that. He said, "We actually like playing like that. We didn't have a problem with the Pistons really until we got beaten up with the injuries, but with but their physicality never bothered us. I thought their physicality made us play better. All right, and truthfully though, there was truth into that quote though, because to be honest with you, the Celtics did play physical ball though too against the Lakers. Just ask Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Kareem about that. All right. So when he talked about on June 3rd, 1988, this was Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, the closeout game when the Pistons were about to beat the Celtics. Ken McHale recalled and talked about how he said that someone told us to get off the court, and he pretty much said, and quote, "You really had a long walk to get out of there. It wasn't like the Garden or other places. You had 100 yards probably before you got into the entryway to the locker rooms." And he was talking about the Pontiac Silverdome, which was basically a football type stadium where the Detroit Lions used to play, and that's where the Pistons used to play the majority of the '80s until the next year when the Palace of Auburn Hills was built. All right, so but McHale also wanted to put things into perspective how the NBA has become more fraternal in order to the latter years, and has never had the formality of the NHL post series handshake line. He said, "I'm going to tell you this: of all the series that I played through in the '80s, after a closeout game, unless you were walking with somebody you knew, you almost never said anything. You might congratulate them if you saw them later, but there wasn't a lot of talk. I mean, congratulatory or trash talking or anything. You just kind of went in the way of the locker room. 90% of the series we won, I didn't talk to anybody. They didn't come up to me, and I didn't think they should. All right." And then he had a notable conversation with Isaiah Thomas in '88 though too that was very meaningful. And he pretty much said, and quote, "I knew Isaiah from the Pan Am games, and Zeke and I have always been good friends. He had something to say to me, and I said, 'Hey man, look, it feels just as bad to lose in the finals as it does to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals.' I said, 'This shit's not over with. You guys got to play another series, so don't celebrate too much.' And I said that when I walked off, and that was advice to him just as a friend." End quote. Now, there might be some truth about what Ken McHale was saying to Isaiah, and I'm not disputing that at all because I believe what Ken McHale was saying. And I do believe that, maybe for security reasons that the Celtics need to make sure to get off the court. But this idea that Larry Bird would walk up to Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer and pretty much shake their hands after the series was over, I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Like, no, bro. Bird had huge sustain and huge hatred against the Pistons based on how they played. All right. And they were pretty much beaten up in 88. The Celtics were getting old. All right. Bill was dealing with a very bad back during that time. And also he was dealing with his heel injury that ended up needing surgery the next year. And so I never believed that for a second. I never believed that the Celtics were going to shake their hands anyway, because they never even shook hands with the Lakers in 87, 85, and 84. So I've just found that statement to be just, little fraudulent a little bit. And then when he talked about the part about being the general manager when he became the vice president of basketball operations for the Timberwolves. All right, after he retired in '93 and became and worked for the Timberwolves organization 2 years later, he said, "End quote. It's interesting to me because part of the time I was playing, and then the latter part I was GM, so I saw it from different sides. They dominated the '90s, and there's no doubt about it. They had a dominant player, and you kind of forget some of the stuff he did. You really watch it, and you're like, oh my God, his ability to take over games was just unreal. They had great shooters around it, and Phil Jackson's system, the triangle, ended up working perfectly for those guys, even though it was a bumpy road in getting it going. But I had enjoyed it and living through those days and seeing him when I was a player, and then in the front office, it's just fun to watch it. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna post a link of the article in the description box so you guys can see it for yourselves. But here's my 2 cents of the situation here. There is a lot of truth to what Ken McHale is saying when he talked about how the players just didn't shake their hands. But this is where his argument, you know, his argument, gets debunked a bit. Because remember, when the Bulls and the Pistons faced against each other in 88, 89, 1990, Michael even talked about in his documentary that if you looked at all the tapes when they lost to the Pistons in 88, 89, and 1990, they shook hands with Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas. They shook hands even after a loss, and it killed Michael Jordan to do that. All right. And the fact of the matter is that when you shake hands, that's basically showing sportsmanship and showing respect to your opponent. And the fact that Isaiah Thomas decided to walk off the court and with his teammates really left a very bad impression. And I understand what Kevin McHale is coming from this perspective, but I think that little notion is that debunked a bit. The other portion about the Bulls complaining about this all the time, the Bulls weren't the only one that complained about it. Okay, Celtic fans would complain about it. The Lakers complained about it. Most of the league complained about the physicality, and the the Celtics did the same thing though too back in the day in the early '80s. Just watch the series between the confrontational series between the 76ers in the early '80s and then the Laker battles of '84, '85, and '87. I mean, they were wars. They were actual wars, and Ken McHale was most remembered for clotheslining Bill Kurt Rambis in midair as he was going to go for the dunk in 1984 in Game 4. So I could get what McHale was coming from that perspective, but bro, you guys were doing the same thing at that time and didn't get that much heat and criticism for that. Unlike the Pistons that were doing the same thing all the time. So I just found it very hypocritical of what Ken McHale was pretty much saying, because his Bird even had an issue with the physicality, and Bill Laimbeer was doing everything he can to try to hurt Bird, and also he almost forgot that Ken McHale had played to that series with a broken bone in his foot, and Bill Laimbeer was intentionally kicking him or trying to stomp on that broken foot anytime they were banging inside of the paint or battling for the boards. So I don't. I'm just kind of a little bit puzzled about what Ken McHale was trying to say. I think what it come across as he's trying to give the Pistons their proper due of how they competed and how they played, and I have no problem with that. All right, but to try to label that the Bulls complained about it a lot about what the Pistons were doing, it was not just everybody. The media was complaining about it. Even the Celtics were complaining about it. The the majority of the league was complaining about what the Pistons were doing, and it all came across as just trying to basically support what the Pistons were doing. And I don't, and I'm just not been the person that would ever do that. All right. My point is this. Okay. My point is this. I get what Kevin McHale was trying to do, but it just didn't come across very well, from my opinion at least, because you're trying to basically you know cover up a little bit what the Pistons were doing, because the Celtics were pretty much doing the same thing. You know what I mean? And I don't know, and I don't think Bird would do something like that. He still hates Bill Laimbeer to this day. All right. I don't think that Bird would try to, condemn, basically condemned, or tried to, had no issue with the Pistons were doing though at that time. All right. And the thing is though, bro, like, I get how things were in the 80s. I understand that if when you lose, you just walk off the floor. You know what I mean? There wasn't much, camaraderie at that time. But I did recall that, Larry Bird giving compliments to Magic Johnson after the 87 series when they lost to the Lakers in 6, when it was pretty much the Celtics' last finals appearance for a very long time, up until 2008. All right. And so I I really do not believe that Ken McHale was trying to was not trying to pick one side. I think he was just trying to pick apart both sides and try to analyze it in his own way. And I'm not saying Ken McHale is not a smart man, because he is smart and intelligent when it comes to basketball and everything else with what he was going through in the 80s. But it's just the quotes like that to me just didn't really come across very well. I think it just came across, from my opinion at least, that it was just trying to, justify what the Pistons were doing at that time. And sure, you may not have a problem with that, but other teams in the NBA had a problem with that, especially with what the Pistons were doing. Clothesline dudes in midair, illegal screens, elbows, grabbing dudes on their arm, intentionally tripping them, all sorts of dirty tactics. And it was taking away what was necessary. What's the beauty of basketball? Now, I know true fans like myself, we appreciate physical play. You know what I mean? Because it's really there's a lot of that missing in today's basketball. But the Pistons, what they were doing at that time, took it way beyond levels. And you could make the case that the Celtics were pretty much doing the same thing. And so I don't know. It's just, it comes across to me as just, both sides knew what they were doing, and they kind of familiarized themselves in terms of what they were doing during the times when they were winning. But when you win championships, it excuses everything. So yeah, that's just pretty much how I felt about looking at that. But again, I'm gonna post a link of the article in the description box there, so you can guys read for it for yourselves there, and then you can and then you can basically analyze what you guys think about what Ken McHale said. Do you think Ken McHale was trying to defend what they were doing, or was he trying to play both sides of the fence? I think, to me, he was playing both sides of the fence. Although he was still giving the Bulls their credit of what they deserve, he was kind of trying to shed a light about how the Pistons would deserve more recognition as champs. And I totally have no problem with that. I agree with that. The Pistons deserve a lot more recognition for what they deserve. But unfortunately, their reputation is very, very negative into how they played their brand of basketball, and they created too many enemies in the NBA. So unfortunately, they're not going to get that kind of recognition that they deserve from a lot of people in today's era of basketball. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And I'm going to continue to do more videos about this. And also, don't miss the final 2 episodes of the Last Dance documentary at 8 p.m. Central Time on ESPN. All right, y'all. Peace.